All right, welcome Canadians of all shapes and sizes and various other things. We're happy to have you here today on our last BNL CA Community of Practice call prior to the Christmas break. We're really excited to have you here and really excited to share this information with you, but most importantly to hear what you have to say and your thoughts. And I will get into that in a moment. But as you know, that the topic of today is on the matching and referral aspect of your coordinated access system. So we'll get into that in a bit. But to get started, part of what the Canadian Alliance is trying to do, and part of what we hope everyone is trying to do as we go forward, is to be much more diversity and inclusiveness aware, and so we want to make sure that we start all of our meetings, regardless of where we are, with a land acknowledgement. And so I've brought forward a sort of a more all-encompassing land acknowledgement that, even though you can read it, I'd like to read it out because I think it's important. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And so please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So if we could take just a moment of silence to think about that. All right, thank you for that. Moving on, because this is coming from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Well, I've got stuff happening here that... There we go. Sorry about that. Canadian Alliance is a diverse organization. We've grown to multiple areas. Most of you know and understand what most of these are. We've got our newest two at the end there, the Allied Networks and Advocacy Program. We have our Recovery for All campaign that's part of advocacy, and then our Allied Networks is a group of organizations or movements within the world of ending homelessness, such as the Right to Housing and the Lived Experience Network and so forth, that we support in a very in-depth partnership way in moving their agendas forward as well. But feel free to go to our website, cah.ca, and click on any one of these for further information. The Canadian Alliance leads a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada. And our work wouldn't be possible without the funding that comes to us through Reaching Home and their commitment to ending homelessness across Canada. So we want to acknowledge Reaching Home and their commitment and their injection of dollars to assist in this effort so that we can do these things. So this webinar today is also part of the results of their funding. My name is Wally Check, and I am going to be your host, and I'm going to be sharing some brief information with you. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of give you a brief understanding of the way we think about community of practice calls, first of all. As I said, this meeting or this webinar is being recorded, and then the webinar and the slides that you see today will be available to you likely tomorrow morning or by midday tomorrow through the Training and Technical Assistance website and under our webinars and archives. And you see that that web address in the background behind me, training.cah.ca. And so you'll be able to get that there. Also, just in terms of this, if you have general comments that you just want to make, sort of like chat posts, then use the chat feature for that. If you have questions that come up for you throughout the presentation that you want to have discussed, and hopefully you're going to be open to speaking and asking your question out loud with all of us and engaging in conversation, then use the Q&A function for that. Just type a question that you want to have discussed in there. Otherwise, if you just want to share a thought or an insight, then use the chat feature for that. In regards to questions, like I mentioned, this is a community of practice webinar. So the difference is this is meant to have some brief information provided that sort of triggers your thought process, gets you thinking about what we're talking about, maybe causes you to wonder or question a little bit yourself, but to also consider what you might have to offer. But the majority of the time is going to be used up with you folks sharing with each other. And we really want to drive that home, that's the point of this, is to create an opportunity for sharing of information, of ideas, of strategies and insights. And so we really want this to be interactive. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to share a few slides on the concept of matching a referral, give you a bit of a perspective that I have on it that is, I mean, I'm definitely not steering away from what we know and understand to be best practices in relation to this. But I have a couple of thoughts in the end that I'm going to draw out to try to kind of trigger some of the discussion and conversation. But if you have a question that you put in the Q&A and you want it discussed, but you're not comfortable with speaking out loud, maybe just indicate that. But if you don't indicate that, then when it comes time for question and discussion, I will likely unmute you and let you know that you're unmuted, and then we can engage in conversation. And again, I want people to feel free to interject. It's a little bit of a free-for-all in this format, so we'll work our best to manage that, but don't hesitate to talk and be prepared to discuss things. So with that in mind, I'm going to move forward in the few bits of presentation that I have for you. So as you're all aware, your coordinated access system is really what I believe is like a set of gears all stuck together effectively, or hopefully stuck together effectively, that as they move, they all work in unison. They all have their role to play and their part to play. And it's this well-oiled machine. And, you know, we see our little guy there. He kind of represents the governance and leadership aspect of the coordinated access system that's just there to kind of monitor and make sure that things are running smoothly, make sure that all the parts are oiled, and that they all have what they need in order to function effectively and to keep kind of a common understanding of things. But in going forward and thinking about that, you know, I want to just share with you what one key element is. And actually, I'm going to talk about three key elements that's going to land on one in the middle here. So when we first talk about matching a referral, one of the things that we know is that we first have to have a process for the participants that we're trying to serve to enter our coordinated access system. So that well-oiled machine has to have an entry point. We call those access points. And At those access points, then we typically have some activities occurring like an intake process. People are added to a by name list, and some prioritization occurs, and a priority list is created out of that. In addition, one of the things that we have to have is we have to have the programs that are involved in the system. So there should be a host of programs and services that have all agreed, hopefully through something formal like an MOU or terms of reference, that make up the various supports that are available to these participants. And some of those would be things like your Housing First programs, permanent supportive housing, your rent subsidies or other financial assistance, and things like that. They all have to be available, and you have to know what they are. You have to know what's available. And then in the middle of all of that is this matching and referral process, so that the people who have come in through your access points and are now on your by name list have a uniform, consistent, equitable way to access those supports. And so that's what we want to talk about today, is what that really means. And so what happens in the matching process? What really occurs? And I would like to suggest that this matching process is a little bit like a puzzle. And I want to talk a little bit further about what's entailed in that puzzle. And so if we go on to the components of this puzzle, first of all, we have a priority list. And this priority list, as we described, is based on things like vulnerability of the individuals that we're serving, their specific needs, the complexities that are associated with them. And the other thing that comes into play, and to be honest with you, this is a bit of a rub for me, but it's a reality that we kind of have to deal with, and that's required documentation. Sometimes people within your system who are on your by name list and then on your priority list, or your priority list is sometimes based on people being what's called document ready, which means that really there's nothing that should be holding them back from being able to move into the various supports and services, including housing options that come up, because they're ready to go. They have everything that they need that's often required. My point in it being a bit of a rub is that my wish would be that we didn't have to have people be document ready, that we were able to remove those barriers. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But like I said, it's a bit of a reality. Next piece of this puzzle is vacancies. We have to know what vacancies there are. And those are vacancies in both housing options that we have available, as well as caseloads and of the support programs. You've got your permanent supportive housing programs. You have to know if there's spaces available. You have to know if there's subsidies available and what the requirements of those subsidies are. And all of these things rely on understanding the defined eligibility criteria of them. And so you have all of those resources available to you. You have to understand what spots or vacancies are available for these people to go into. The next thing you have to do then is based on all of that information, everything that you know, there's a sort of a filtration process where you're comparing those on your priority list with the availability of spots or vacancies to determine which participants you have that are imminently ready to take advantage of those spots. And again, I wish people all could be considered imminently ready, but sadly, based on the nature of things and the fact that landlords often require particular documentation and so forth, there are criteria that people have to be prepared to meet. And so that's where this filtration process comes in, is how do we take the people that we have and understand if they fit with whatever vacancies or spots in our supports and services that are available. The next thing is case conferencing, and this may or may not have to happen regarding every participant, but it's an important function to have available in that matching and referral process. Case conferencing generally comes into play when we're having difficulty prioritizing people, when we've got people that are all very similar and there's maybe some discrepancies in the information that we have about who is a priority at this point in time. And we also would look at case conferencing when we have individuals who are on that priority list who regularly show up being ineligible for the openings or the offerings that come available. And we would need to have greater discussion about that to see what needs to occur so that they can be eligible and how we can adjust things. Some people are stuck and are becoming stale on that priority list. And so we need to maybe have a case conference to figure out why that is. And then we have individuals who have some complexities that are creating challenges for them. And maybe we need to find a way to pull in additional supports and resources to help address some of those complexities so that now they become more, and I hate to use the word, but eligible based on the criteria that seems to be holding them back because of those complexities. Again, complexities should not in reality be a barrier if we had a perfect world, but the reality right now is that they are. Then the offering can be made. So we found a match, the offering can be made. And I put complete transparency here because I think it's really important that the individuals really know and are clear when they are told that something is available for them in terms of a spot on a caseload or in housing or both, what that really means. What it means in terms of the criteria, the guidelines, the expectations, all of the things that would be required of them, if there are such things, to be able to move into that, that location or to have access to that particular program. We don't want them to be surprised by anything. We want them to be able to make an informed choice. And that's why I put choice in all capital letters, because it is still their choice. And there has to be active participant voice. They have to have the ability to refuse that particular offering if for whatever reason, and it's not up to us to judge that it doesn't feel right to them. And we also have to pay attention to making multiple offerings to a particular program that is winding up just causing a backup in their caseload. So essentially that program is now having to deal with a wait list. And so we need to be considering those things. But we want to make sure that we connect with that individual and make that offering to them and do that in a place that's comfortable for them and that is gonna, it's gonna help them feel like they can trust the process. And again, we have to be as clear as we possibly can. And then comes a warm handoff. And again, this is where the information is shared with those individuals and the organization or the housing program or whatever it is that's going to be working with them. This is best done before someone moves into housing, if housing is happening right away for them. They might be going to, let's say, a Housing First program that, depending upon how your system works, that may be part of their role, is to then find housing with them. But some situations, they may be moving into housing right away. So this warm handoff should occur before they move into housing. And again, it should be happening in a place that these participants feel comfortable and feel like they can share whatever struggles or frustrations they have with what's going on. And we can all be aware of what's happening. And so then once that warm handoff occurs, then that individual would be removed from your priority list and they are considered matched. And when they are considered matched, then we would see them on their way to recovery, which is what you see in the middle there. They've got financial supports happening, they've got housing, and they have other supports and programs they're tied to. and they can move forward in a client-driven or a participant-driven manner based on what they want from their life moving forward. Now, all this said and done, oftentimes I think programs or communities in their coordinated access system find themselves in this situation, where if you see this all as a big puzzle, the puzzle is sort of filled up and there are no spots available. There's no vacancies, there's no housing. What do we do? How do we deal with this? How can we say we're doing what we're supposed to be doing if there's nothing available? We've just now got this large list of individuals who's wanting these supports, but we don't have anywhere to put them. Sometimes I think we see ourselves like this, and maybe this is part of your prioritization and matching process where people are sitting down and talking, and you've got multiple individuals and you've got like one spot available, and it's like, how do we fill it? Who do we choose? It's really difficult to decide who's the priority at this point in time, and those kinds of things. And sometimes it ends up that you do find a way and you match somebody in and you fill that spot, and that's great. But you've got all of those other spaces left available, and that's still challenging. What I want to throw out to you before we actually open it up to questions and conversation and things like that is this idea that I believe that part of our role in a coordinated access system is to sort of continue to pull the pieces of the puzzle back from the inside out and create more space. And what that means is that those pieces that we're removing are the barriers, are all of the eligibility pieces that sometimes get in the way of individuals. And you've probably run into a situation where you have had a person who is, based on all of your community criteria, at the top of your priority list, but there are certain aspects of documentation and different things like that that you're having trouble getting dealt with. And maybe their complexities are such that the housing you do have available won't take them on. We want to get to a place where more and more and more of those barriers are removed so that the matching process becomes essentially barrier-free for everyone on your by name list and priority list. And so I believe that that's part of a coordinated access system's job, is that on an ongoing basis, you're also working to try to remove those barriers. Now, it's not going to happen all at once. There's going to be difficulty and it's going to take time. But I think that that's part of your job. You can't just say, okay, we have these programs, they have their criteria, and this is what we're stuck with. And so when we have people coming into our system, they have to be able to fit that criteria. I think part of your role is to continually work with your programs and services that are involved and recruiting additional programs and services in a way that helps to remove those barriers. So you're bringing these programs into your system and you're working with them to buy into that housing first philosophy that should be at the foundation of our system, which is housing is a basic human right. So if it's a basic human right, what barriers should exist? None. That supports and services for individuals who have had difficulty in the past because of criteria and eligibility issues haven't been able to get access to them when they absolutely need and want them. Those should eventually be removed or massaged or smoothed over so that these individuals who've typically not been able to access services can start accessing them without so many barriers. And so it opens up that puzzle. And eventually in my dream, we would get to a place where there are no puzzle pieces other than the programs that are there. They're providing the supports. We have people on our priority lists who are, chronically homeless, who as soon as they come in the system, we have housing and we have supports and so forth ready for them. Now, I get that that's a sort of a pie in the sky kind of dream, but I don't believe it's impossible. And I believe that where there is a will, there is a way. So That being said, I just want to kind of leave it there and hope that that has kind of spurred on some thinking for you. And I have a few questions that I want to throw out. And I'd love to hear from anyone on the call who would like to share. But what are the ongoing challenges you face when it comes to matching and referral process? How have you worked to mitigate challenges if you've had them? What kinds of things have you done? What are some of the strategies you've used, things like that, that you think other people would be open to hearing about? And what else would you actually want to know or talk about regarding this matching and referral process? So with that being said, yeah, I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. What's on your mind? What do you want to talk about? What are you thinking about? Let me know if you've got a question, if you want to say something. Let's talk about it. In the meantime, I want to just kind of also share that, I listened to a podcast the other day where it was talking about some of the challenges related to coordinated access and the list, if you will. And I think that a lot of people in a lot of communities sort of struggle with understanding that list. And that's a question that I have too. If you don't understand your list, your by name list or your priority list, if you don't understand that list, how do you manage that? And how do you know who is really next on that list? How do your participants know where they are on that list? And how does the community understand the criteria and how people move on that list? And I would imagine that that's a challenge as well, because you can't appropriately match people unless you understand where that list exists and how it functions. So, what do you want to talk about? Don't be shy. This is what we're here for, is to discuss and to share and to challenge, to throw out ideas. So who wants to be first? Waiting. Okay. All right. So first question we have is from Linda. And Linda, I want to just take you off mute and allow you to speak. So you should be able to unmute yourself now, Linda. So why don't you go ahead and ask your question live?
Hi, Wally. It's Linda from Nelson. I apologize. I actually only tuned in about 15 minutes ago. So if you've already addressed this, I'm so sorry. We're in the process of setting our priorities. And right now we have a really long list of things that make people more vulnerable and put up more barriers to them accessing housing, and we're trying to create that short list of do that prioritization process, and we're just really struggling to, like, it's really hard to say that one person's needs or vulnerabilities are more important than another's, and also people's lives are really complex, and so putting people in any kind of box is hard for us as a community, and I'm just wondering how you would respond to that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, that's a bit more of a prioritization question, but it's still, we can't effectively match people unless we have some priorities determined. But I think that, before I go on, I want to make sure that if anybody else has an answer or response to this, I want you to share, because some of you out there may have some great ideas around this topic. But I think that, Linda, my challenge with your question is that I think it's a fair challenge. I think it's a fair question. And I don't think we should be putting people into boxes necessarily. But I guess I would potentially come back to some of those individuals that are sort of more resistant to what you're talking about. And I would ask a follow-up question, which is, then if you have one, let's say we're talking about housing, and you have one housing spot that's opened up, how do people feel like that spot should be filled? And what would be the determinant of who gets that? So let's say you have, and some people might say, well, then it should be whoever comes into your system first. The challenge I have with that is, but what if the person who's come into your system first actually maybe is couch surfing with a friend, and they have challenges and difficulties, but they have a roof over their head, versus somebody who's come in after them, who's sleeping rough, who's got some severe health conditions and so forth. Should we still offer that housing option to the individual who showed up first? And so the question is complex enough that I don't think there's a hard and fast answer, but there has to be some way that when you look at all of the people who are looking for the supports you're offering or trying to offer, there has to be some way to determine who you're going to make that offering to. And maybe that's about getting together and just discussing it. And so we often recommend that people have a committee, or that case conferencing aspect of things that we discussed, where if you can have your set criteria, but then if there's still challenges, you can sit down with those stakeholders and say, okay, so now, all of these people sort of do look like they're complex and need support. Let's talk about who really should get this housing option right now, or who needs it the most. And let's discuss it as a group. But what has to happen is communities have to be able to come to a determination that whoever is on that committee to have that conversation, that they accept the results of that discussion. Because otherwise you'd have to have every single person from every program on that committee, and then you'd never make any decisions. So there has to be some level of agreement within the system that whoever sits at that table, that they sort of accept what they're coming up with as a response. So I'm not sure if that is a sufficient answer, Linda, because your question is really complex, and it's not a sort of black or white thing. I don't know, do you have any other follow-up responses to that?
I think that's a really good answer, Wally, and I think that that's one that my community would really accept. If to do that matching at a case conferencing table. I think they would really trust the people around that table. I think the fear was in creating priority variables that we filter the by name list with, and so it being more of an algorithm making the decisions, as opposed to the people with the experience working with the population. But I think if it was a combination of both, or if it was that case conferencing table making those decisions, I think people would be more comfortable with that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, you betcha. I've always felt like that communities are going to run into trouble if they try to do this work just based on, like you say, an algorithm, or to automate the process. I don't personally believe that you can automate coordinated access. I think that there has to be, we're dealing with human beings, and so there has to be a human element in that decision-making process. But it just has to be agreed upon that how those decisions are made is as fair and equitable as possible. So yeah, great question. Thank you for that. The next question we have here is from Rain Gill. So Rain, I'm going to allow you to speak. So you are able to unmute yourself and talk if you're open to that, and feel free, share your question.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering, the community I'm working in, we have an existing by name list, and we're now starting to look at the coordinated access process. One of the sort of early roadblocks we're looking at is when we all come together, all the different agencies for these case conferences to discuss the sort of prioritized folks on the by name list, we're running into some issues around consent because the consent form that folks are filling out to be referred to the by name list doesn't really cover all of the information that we would need to discuss. So we're trying to, discuss these folks' situations and match them, but we're limited to very basic demographic information that we can share.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask what you might think is a silly question, but what I'm wondering is, has there been discussion about adjusting that consent form to be more all-encompassing, and what's the response been from that?
Yeah, there definitely has been discussions around that, and I think they're still in the works. It seems to be quite a lengthy legal process that has to go through, lawyers and all that kind of stuff. So we've kind of been waiting for quite some time to hear back about that consent.
And see, this is kind of tied to what I was getting at earlier about the barriers that we put in place, and maybe the coordinated access system sort of leadership or coordination of that isn't putting those barriers in place. But organizations that come in and they say, we want to be part of this, they bring barriers with them, right? They bring barriers based on policy. And that's where most of this lawyer stuff you're talking about, at least from my experience, comes from, where an agency that's involved, well, their particular policies regarding sharing information and consent and so forth are so strict that in order to change those, yeah, they feel like they have to get lawyers involved and so forth. And so that's the challenge. And so I think that, the best that you can do is you can start that process, and which it sounds like you guys have. But in the meantime, you go forward. In the end, I mean, says, so if that person tells whoever is supporting them, I'm more than willing to have, well, then, and if so I think, and every community has had people who have create better information sharing policies within their system that kind of work. Feel free to share that. I would also suggest that you have a look in the Built for Zero website, the Canadian Alliance Built for Zero Canada website, that there's lots of resources there, and there's some sample consent forms and things like that that have been used in various communities that might be helpful, that you could take forward and say, hey, would this work for us? And it could be shared and amongst people. But you're talking about a challenge that only gets addressed by trial and error and time. And otherwise, if people are that concerned about it, like, I guess what I wonder is, if somebody that you're wanting to talk about, you would only have that problem if they are already sort of involved with one of the programs that maybe sits at that table. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would think so. And I mean, the trouble is that some of our agencies, like the agency that I work for, we are considered health information custodians. So we're bound by PHIPAA legislation and things like that set out with the government. And then other agencies aren't necessarily bound by the same legislation. So there's a lot of different, I think, layers of consent within the agencies.
Yeah. And I think a coordinated access system would do well to develop kind of an all-encompassing information sharing policy, and then hope that all of the organizations that are getting involved can take a look at that and say, can we tweak our policies? Can we bend or adjust or massage our policies to make it fit with this? Because in the end, you know, I mean, I see it all the time. Different organizations, their policies make it difficult for some of these people we're trying to serve to access their supports or access their assistance in some way. And so it's an ongoing battle, but it's a battle. I guess my biggest point of advice is it's a battle that needs to be waged. And if you don't, if you just kind of leave it and say, well, we're stuck with the policies around privacy and consent that everybody else has, well, you're going to limit yourself. And the bottom line is it's those types of policies that have made it difficult for these people to access supports forever. And that's why they are the chronically homeless, because they haven't been able to meet the criteria and policies that the standard systems, the way they were, have had in place. And so our work isn't going to be able to go forward until policies are changed. And policies are meant to be, like, they're not meant to be forever in stone. Policies can be changed. So, and I think that's where a lot of places feel like they have to get lawyers involved because they don't want to leave themselves open to any kind of litigation. But yeah, I'm not sure how well that answered your question, if at all, but you just need to keep moving forward with that because you've got to get those barriers removed.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, if anybody else has any thoughts, feel free to throw them in the chat or, you know, post in here that you want to speak to that. I'm going to move on for the moment. And we have someone who just added in our community, we have 0% vacancy, and it can feel really challenging to conceptualize how we will help move folks from homelessness to housing. Do you have any guidance for small rural communities with little to no housing availability? Another great question. And again, yeah, how do you match people to a service or to housing if it doesn't feel like you have it there? And my thoughts on that are, you know, again, like when we talk about housing first, and I was actually just in a conversation the other day with Sam Sambaris, who, if you don't know who he is, he's kind of the father of the housing first movement. But we were talking about how many people look at that like a black and white thing. Like you're either doing housing first or you're not. And then if you don't have housing to put people in, well, then you're not doing housing first. Housing first is based on principles. And housing first is a concept that you're buying into it and you're saying, we as an organization believe in this and we are doing everything we can to follow that principle. But just because there isn't housing doesn't mean we're not. And so that's the first thing, is I don't want you to be discouraged because you don't have vacancies or whatever it is. I think it's just important that you have to try to be creative and, you know, try to utilize the organizations and resources that are in that area to build those options up. You know, for one, if you're not already, I would definitely get in connection with Terry Lee Kelford, who is, I talked in the beginning about our allied networks. Well, one of those is the National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness. You can go onto there and you can get put on their mail list and get updates on what's happening there. We're actually in the process of developing a rural and remote housing first toolkit that will be an addendum to the Canadian Housing First Toolkit. But, you know, there's people in rural and remote areas who have found creative ways to generate housing options, like building, you know, getting access to some funds and building tiny houses, building into their community sort of rooming options, or like supported housing options where a person who maybe has a suite in their home is willing to have someone come and live in that suite and have supports, built in, or maybe they are service some of the supports. And so, yeah, it's challenging, but again, if there's a will, there's a way. And if you bring in enough of the people that are stakeholders in that rural or remote area, then eventually, and you talk about it enough, you'll be able to start to uncover some of those hidden gems and hidden opportunities that make housing available, and right now there's a bunch of grant money that's available from the federal government around permanent supportive housing. And a lot of rural communities will often have, hotels that are not being used anymore, that might be for sale because there's not a lot of traffic or whatever, that some of this money could be used to help to renovate those buildings and create individual apartments or whatever within them that can be permanent housing options. And so I think the biggest thing is that it's about creativity. And in terms of supports, I know that sometimes when it's difficult to have a worker get out to a rural community, they again have engaged in like other social service agencies and brought them in as partners, that they actually can provide some of that in-person support and connection and checking in and things like that. So there are ways, but I would definitely get connected with the National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness and start looking at some additional ideas that they have there. Okay. And Rain also commented on the same thing, that it's frustrating. We have zero housing opportunities, and it's difficult. But again, it's, as we get creative and as we encourage our municipalities and developers and builders and landlords and everybody else to start to come on board and to understand. And a lot of this is a matter of ongoing education, ongoing discussion, and repeating and repeating and repeating. And the people who are, I would encourage you that the people who are your biggest naysayers about these things, then grab a hold of them and say, okay, I get what you're talking about. I get how frustrating it can be, but I need you to come and help us figure out what we can do then, and bring them on board. And even if they're saying you can't do it this way that you're trying to, well then, okay, help us to figure out how we can. Like, your point is valid. So come forward then and help us figure it out. So the next question is from Mona, and Mona, I'm gonna unmute you and I'm gonna let you talk if you're open to that. So feel free.
Great. Hi. Thanks.
Yeah.
So here in Whitehorse, we've just launched a 100 homes campaign. So trying to bring in private market landlords for the most part to sort of deal with this issue that we're just talking about, of feeling like we have basically zero vacancy. And one of the challenges that we're sort of running into in terms of matching, and this is, we haven't actually matched anyone yet, we're still looking for the units, but I know this is going to come up, is that when we're working with private market landlords, they're used to having a certain level of discretion in terms of who moves in and putting up some of those barriers, but also maybe not having fully transparent eligibility criteria, right? It's a lot about sort of fit and who they feel like is gonna be a good tenant and that kind of thing. So I'd love to hear from you, Wally, or from other people who have worked with private market rental housing in terms of how that matching process works when you've got a bit more discretion on kind of the landlord side, and you're not just able to kind of decide who might be the best fit and then match them and know that that will definitely be a guaranteed housing opportunity.
Right, right. Yeah, common issue and challenge that comes up. And while maybe other people are thinking about how they would respond to that, I have two thoughts initially. One of them is, and I was going to mention this earlier, I think a big factor, a big component, and when you look at programs and supports within your system that you can have available to you, or a particular role that needs to be there, is I believe that each program or each coordinated access system needs to have an individual or a role that is designed to actually do the housing procurement, where their job is actually to connect with landlords and give them the spiel, help them to understand what the program is all about, help them to understand what it's going to mean to have these individuals, what the benefits are of having, being involved with this program, because there's a lot of landlords who have come and got involved and have been willing to participate with these individuals, because for one, you have a never-ending stream of tenants. Even if one of them ends up being evicted for whatever reason, you've got somebody else right behind them waiting for something, right? So landlords will never have to go without somebody. And oftentimes there is, financial assistance that ends up being guaranteed through your rent subsidies and so forth. So that's an appealing thing too. A lot of landlords will tell you that, well, they deal with difficult tenants, whether they're part of one of these programs or not. And lots of times the tenants that they thought were going to be great end up being disasters. But now these individuals are coming with supports. And so how often have landlords been able to have that? So there's lots of things that can be shared with them to help them understand. But if you have someone who has that role of performing that spiel, as I say, they become very, very good at it, and they become expert at helping these people to understand. And they can also take a business approach with it, where they help actually landlords see the difference in the bottom line down the road in having, participants from your programs as their tenants versus other people as their tenants. And again, not to say that we want other people to lose out on housing either, but so that's one thing, is to have that role in place that does the housing procurement. And so now you have, whatever housing options set up and ready to go and vetted, right? They're already vetted for the type of participants that you're wanting to house. That also includes helping to work with, municipalities and developers and whoever to potentially build or create new housing options. And so they're looking for these creative things that they can do. The second thing, though, I would say that has been a really valuable approach and strategy for a lot of communities is taking the head lease approach, where if you have an organization, or let's say the overarching body of your coordinated access system is willing to enter into a head lease or a master lease, where you can identify however many landlords that are willing to participate, and the organization gets the lease and takes on the lease responsibilities. And so a landlord is often more willing to lease to an established organization, and then that organization has the ability to move whoever they want into those units. And the landlord is a little less stressed about it because they know they have that organization to come back to if there are problems. And so that has been a really effective strategy for a lot of people. And so, yeah, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on those, but that's a couple of ideas that I have. I'm not sure if other people have some thoughts. Any considerations about those two ideas, Mona?
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. And I think we've got some of those pieces in place already. So it's nice to hear that those are things that have worked elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like on the offer side. You know, what do you tell the potential tenant when they're
So
entering into, you know, maybe the offer is that they have an offer to, you know, we're offering them the opportunity to be maybe one of a couple of people that the landlord can choose from.
well, yeah, if you've got a landlord, that you have vetted, like I say, let's say you don't have, let's forget about the master lease possibility, but you've gone and you've been able to do all of this education. This landlord says, you know what, you bet, I'll give it a try. Let's see how it goes. Part of that vetting is you're saying, you know, you've already described to the landlord what some of the characteristics are of these individuals. If they're saying, well, I still want to have the final say, well, then they do. I mean, that's part of the criteria, right? That's just what you have to deal with. And so then you go back to your prioritization list or whatever, and you look and you go, okay, who all do we have that you know potentially would be a fit here, and who would we say is at the top of that list? Let's make them the offer, give them the interview with the landlord if that's what the landlord wants to do before anything. And if the landlord says no, they say no. But that individual has to know ahead of time that it is still possible that this landlord will say no. But otherwise, here are the things that we know from this landlord that are the expectations. And generally, or typically speaking, a landlord can't add requirements to a lease beyond the standard lease items. They can say no to a person, but once that person has been said yes to, typically from a legal perspective, they can't be adding in additional conditions to a lease. That's infringing on people's rights. And so, but hopefully what you've done in the meantime is you've got it to where this landlord says, no, let's give this program a try. That means they've said, whoever you have, bring them in, and we'll go with that and we'll see how it goes. But it's important that the program is prepared to say, we can't guarantee problem-free tenancy, but we can guarantee responsiveness. We can guarantee that if you have a problem, you can let us know and we will respond and we will do whatever we can. And oftentimes that's amazing to landlords. But it's about that transparency about what's being offered, what's available, and whether that participant is willing to look at that or not. And if they're not, or if they get turned down by that landlord, well, then you go to the next person on your list and you make the same offering.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful. And yeah, we'll let you know how it goes.
All right, awesome. And if other people have thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat for Mona. Yeah, I mean, and keep asking the question, keep looking for that information. Somebody asked me to put in the chat, the direct link for Built for Zero's website. So I'm going to do that right now. So that's, you should all see that. That's where you go. There's lots of great resources in there. All of the TTA and Built for Zero resources around coordinated access are being housed through that website. So have a look. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions and our time is up. In fact, we've gone about 5 minutes overboard. But I just wanted to thank everybody for all of the great questions and for all of the information that was shared and discussed, and your willingness to talk openly about these things. It's never easy, so please make sure that you're reaching out and talking and getting support from other people. And feel free to connect with us at any time. Again, this is being recorded and will be available sometime tomorrow through our website at training.cah.ca under webinars and under archives. So with that being said, again, I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and all of those other sayings and things that go along with this time of year. Most of all, though, I wish everybody to have some peace and happiness throughout this time, and I hope you get some time off, and I hope that we can all have a much better 2021. And on top of all of that, I hope that we can make great strides in ending homelessness. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon. Bye for now.